There's something deeply unsettling about ventriloquist dummies. Maybe it's their stiff, lifeless faces, or the way they seem to stare into your soul. Or maybe it's the idea that they might not be as lifeless as they seem. The 1978 film Magic, directed by Richard Attenborough, and starring Anthony Hopkins, takes this fear to a whole new level. It's not just a movie about a creepy dummy, it's a psychological thriller that blurs the line between reality and delusion, perfecting the horror trope in a way that few films before or after have managed. The idea of the ventriloquist dummy as a horror icon isn't new. One of the earliest and most influential examples is Dead of Night in 1945, where a ventriloquist believes his dummy is alive and controlling him. It set the foundation for the horror trope we know today, a performer whose dummy becomes a sinister, autonomous entity. Over the years, we've seen this trope evolve, appearing in The Twilight Zone, Devil Doll, and even in horror comedies like Goosebumps with Slappy the Dummy. But why do ventriloquist dummies make such effective horror symbols? Part of it lies in the concept of the uncanny valley. Objects that look human but aren't quite right make us deeply uncomfortable. Dummies exist in that eerie space between lifelike and artificial. Horror films exploit this by playing with the illusion of control. A ventriloquist controls the dummy, but what happens when the dummy starts to control them? That shift in power is what makes the trope so effective and terrifying. What makes Magic different from its predecessors is that it strips away any supernatural elements. Unlike later films like Child's Play, where Chucky is literally possessed, Magic keeps the horror psychological. Fats, the dummy, isn't alive, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, he represents the fractured mind of Corky, the ventriloquist played masterfully by Anthony Hopkins. Corky isn't haunted by an evil spirit. He's haunted by his own mind. The horror comes from watching his mental state unravel, from seeing him lose control over his own darker impulses, which he projects onto Fats. Magic doesn't just use the dummy as a creepy prop. It turns him into a symbol of Corky's deepest fears, his anxieties, and ultimately, his destruction. The idea of ventriloquism as a psychological phenomenon is fascinating. Many professional ventriloquists describe a feeling of their dummy having its own personality, sometimes even responding in ways they didn't consciously plan. It's a form of controlled dissociation, where the ventriloquist temporarily separates themselves from the dummy, almost as if it has its own will. In the film Magic, this concept is taken to an extreme. Corky doesn't just act as if Fats is real. He fully believes it. This taps into something deeper: the fear of losing control over one's own identity. Psychological studies suggest that some ventriloquists, especially those under stress, can start to experience their dummies as independent entities. In Corky's case, his anxieties, insecurities, and violent urges manifest through Fats, allowing him to act on them while dissociating from the responsibility. This isn't just a horror trope, it's rooted in real psychology. Dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, and extreme stress disorders can all lead to a person feeling like another voice or entity is influencing them. Magic doesn't need supernatural horror because it plays on something more terrifying: the possibility that a person can lose control of their own mind. A major reason why Magic is so effective is Anthony Hopkins' performance. He doesn't just play Corky, he plays Corky and Fats. The way he seamlessly shifts between his own nervous, stuttering voice and Fats' confident, sinister tone is terrifying. It makes it feel like there are two distinct personalities trapped inside one body. Originally, Steven Spielberg expressed interest in directing the film after he read the book Magic, written by William Goldman. Spielberg even considered casting Robert De Niro for Corky. It is possible that we could have gotten a completely different performance than Hopkins, who was critically acclaimed for the role. What makes Hopkins' performance haunting is how restrained it is. He doesn't rely on theatrics or overt madness. Instead, he plays Corky like a man barely holding it together, constantly teetering on the edge of a breakdown. His eyes dart nervously, his speech stumbles, and his body language shrinks as Fats grows bolder. You can see the internal war play out across his face in real time. It's not just acting, it's embodiment. What sets Magic apart from other horror films with dummies is that it isn't really about the dummy at all. It's about psychological collapse. The film plays with our expectations. Are we watching a supernatural horror, or just the slow breakdown of a deeply disturbed man? By the time Corky fully succumbs to his delusions, the dummy no longer needs to move or talk on its own to be terrifying. The genius of Magic is how it weaponizes ambiguity. There's never a moment when the dummy leaps up or blinks or moves on its own, because it doesn't have to. The horror isn't in what we see, but in what we think we're seeing. The line between Corky and Fats blurs so completely that we start questioning everything ourselves. Is Fats really speaking, or is Corky just lost in his own madness? The film lets that question linger, uncomfortably unresolved, and in doing so, it forces the audience to confront the terror of mental illness not as spectacle, but as an internal prison with no clear escape. By the end, Magic leaves us with an unsettling question. Was Corky ever in control, or was it always Fats? The genius of Magic is that it doesn't need to answer that outright, because the horror of losing control over one's own mind is more terrifying than any monster could ever be.